Welcome, everybody, to our webinar, Debunking Performance Management Manager Myths. It is great to have you join us today, and we hope you find this webinar informative and also entertaining. I think it should be entertaining, hopefully. First of all, just some housekeeping information. So, questions. If you look down in the right-hand side corner of your screen, you should see there's a questions area where you can send us questions throughout. Just drop them in there, and I'll see if I can kind of incorporate the questions as we go along, but if not, we'll have time at the end as well to answer those as well. And if we don't have time to answer them, then we'll follow up with a blog post or something like that to make sure that we address everything that you're asking about. This webinar will also be recorded and a copy will be emailed to you as well, so you can share it with your colleagues afterwards as well. And also, we have produced a short guide on this topic that you can download from the resources page on our website. And also, I'm hoping someone is going to send the link into the chat box as well to our PDF called Busting Performance Management Myths. So hopefully, you'll be able to see that there. If not, we'll send it around later. Okay, I think that's it. So that's housekeeping, and we're ready to start. Let me start by introducing myself. So for anyone who doesn't know me yet, I'm Rolly Walter. I'm the founder of Appraised. And as you may know, Appraised is an employee performance management platform that is designed to help managers and employees get the very best from each other, getting feedback on how they're doing, alignment on objectives, and clarity on opportunities for personal development and growth. So we see performance management as a win-win for the employee and the employer if done right. And that's really what our kind of platform is focused on. But today, I'm joined by, we have Mark Earnshaw. Mark is a consultant at PeopleDev and has worked in talent, learning, and organizational development over the last 20 years, impacting thousands of people at global organizations. And he is driven by helping people and teams improve their performance. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for the kind introduction, Rolly. Delighted to be here.
Good. We also have Amira Kola. Amira has supported organizations and employees in optimizing their performance, productivity, and engagement. And having worked in the field of performance management for 30 years, she has experienced the subject from every possible angle, from designing and delivering performance solutions to program management of global software implementations. I know, Amira, you and I have had some good conversations about that over the past few years. She is passionate about guiding organizations, managers, and employees through this complex world, optimizing performance and engagement with tried and tested practical tools and techniques. Amira, hello, thanks for joining.
Well, great to be here. Thank you very much.
Good. And now we have Tom Blake. Tom is a fractional CPO and runs his own consultancy, Blake Connolly. He provides HR support across the full HR lifecycle at a strategic and hands-on delivery level, working with CEOs, boards, and executive teams to transform their business towards their future state. He's worked in tech, retail, metals, PR, agencies, chemicals, biotech, with a strong focus on transformation, data intelligence, talent mobility, performance, and reward, and also a bit of culture and employee experience as well. So, Tom, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Rory. Great to be here.
Cool. Right. Okay. I'm going to see if I can publish the results of the... can I do this? Can you guys see the results of the poll on the screen? Okay, fantastic. So these are our 5 or 6 top reasons that we get from managers on why they can't do performance conversations or performance management. And yeah, as mentioned, I'm going to play the role, which is not something I find terribly hard, of a somewhat kind of accidental line manager, of which something like 82% of managers are in the UK. And we're going to kind of turn the tables now. So normally, I don't know, anyone listening, if you work in HR, especially in a small company, you might feel a little isolated from time to time when you feel like you're the sole person trying to get managers to do what is a really important task, really important for the organization and really important for the people that the managers manage. And it can be really hard, but we're going to turn the tables today. And instead of me being the sole HR person trying to push this through, I'm going to play the role of a manager. And we've got 3 people who are going to kind of come at me and tell me why I need to take this seriously and properly. So I'm hoping by the end of this, everyone listening will feel really confident in how to tackle every possible objection they get. Now, I'm going to go through this in roughly the order that we can see there, but I think the kind of most common objection that we hear from managers is, and you can see this objection right at the top there, is just, I don't have time to do this. And I'm going to start with you, Tom, if that's all right. What would you say to me, a manager who says, look, I get it, it's kind of important, but to be honest, I've got to make this sale, I've got to push this deal through, I've got to deal with this other urgent thing. I don't have time.
So, Rowley, how much time do you think you need? Let's start there.
Well, I think it'll probably take me, I don't know, but it just feels like a lot. It could be an hour, maybe, 2 hours to kind of think about everything that person has done and kind of summarize it all.
And what would you hope to achieve out of this 1 or 2 hour conversation?
Well, I think, first of all, actually, probably an hour of that would just be preparation on my own, maybe even 2 hours. And then the conversation, could be 45 minutes or an hour. I think maybe it's the preparation in particular that feels like a big burden. But what would I hope to achieve? Give that person some thoughts on how they're doing and a bit of feedback, and maybe set them some objectives so that they know what to focus on.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you're thinking that this is quite a big, long conversation. So you're thinking maybe 2 hours, prep, delivery, thinking about it afterwards. So,
could be, because I feel like I've got to make sure everything's absolutely 100% clear in my head. I can't afford to, miss something out or say the wrong thing, and I've got to prepare for every possible eventuality of this conversation.
Then if you're going to try and do that, you'll never have a performance conversation, because you can't prepare for every single eventuality. Let me try and help you here. I think you are overthinking what a performance conversation is. I think there are times in a year, maybe, yes, you will have to go through, do a lot of research, do a lot of background on what's happened, what needs to change, what needs to be better, and what people need to focus on. But why don't we start with a small step, something that might take you maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Would that sound like a good use of your time if we could get you into a performance conversation that takes 5-10 minutes?
That sounds much better. Yep.
So how about in your next time that you're speaking to any of your team, you just say to them, how are you getting on today?
Okay. But don't I need to sort of make sure I've got notes on everything and have thought about it all? And, what I don't want to do, I guess, is go into a conversation where I do have a concern that I want to raise, but we set off on the wrong footing.
So that might be a slightly different conversation, but I'm wondering if you're kind of pulling all of these sorts of thoughts into every single conversation. So not every conversation needs to be corrective. A simple performance conversation can be as simple as just saying, how are you getting on today? What help do you need? What support do you need? Or how did you get on with that piece of work last week or yesterday? You can keep them really small and really short. If the conversation then goes on and you feel like you're getting out of your depth in terms of the conversation for the amount of knowledge you have in your head, just pause the conversation. It's fine. You don't need to know everything. I think it feels to me that you feel as though you need to have everything in your head all at once. So you must be absolutely 100% prepared for every single eventuality that might happen. It's no wonder you don't want to do it. I wouldn't want to do it, frankly. Because that's too scary. It's too scary for your employee as well. Your employee is not going to be sitting there thinking, my manager knows the answer to everything. What employees want is a manager who they can just come and talk to. They can bring issues to, not necessarily for you to solve them, but just for you to be a sounding board. So if you start your view on performance management at that level of, I am here to help my team, then actually just let your conversations flow organically. You will have what you need to have in your head already. You don't need to do that amount of prep, in my opinion.
Great. Any other comments from Amira or Mark on the I don't have time?
Yeah, I guess some organisations, so I absolutely agree with Tom that it is, and I think one of the things that can get in the way of a manager just embracing the whole concept of managing people is this idea that they're meant to have all the answers. And lots and lots and lots of research shows that employees don't expect that. They just, as you said, want someone to talk to. Having said that, I do think there are probably some people who are on this call who are in maybe more formal, structured types of environments where they do know that there is a performance review that is meant to be, more formulaic than that and a bit more, kind of meaty and structured. And in which case I would say, hopefully they have got some sort of paperwork, or better, a system like Appraised, or where they can look at the stuff that has been building up, hopefully, in the system over time. Because yes, remembering everything that happened months ago is really difficult for everybody, which is why there's this often issue where it's only the stuff that happened in the last few weeks that anyone remembers, and that frustrates the employee, and it's kind of it just takes out of context all of the previous stuff. So my advice, I guess, would be make sure that you have reviewed and kind of revised feedback they've got over a longer period than just the stuff you can remember, how they were doing their objectives a few months ago, what projects they were doing back, in the previous half of the year, etc., so that you're not having to remember everything at your fingertips.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
I think I would just add, I think similar to, I love how Tom asked you all those great questions, but to try and sort of dig in and scratch beneath the surface, because not having time seems like a surface level sort of objection, and digging into actually what's the real reason, be it the amount of preparation that they feel like they might have to do, or they don't feel confident enough to have the conversation. But I think a lot of these people, they obviously are very busy, and if they've one of these accidental managers potentially doing this sort of stuff, feeling like it's on the side of their desk, but if they got an invite to something that they really wanted to go to, tomorrow afternoon or something, or an exciting event, they'd find the time probably to be able to do that. They'd rearrange things, but they probably wouldn't do that to have this big scary performance conversation. So digging into it a little bit and just understanding what's the real reason.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to come on to
just one last, sorry, Ronnie, just one other thing just to say on the I don't have time. The other thing that I would say is it's not all the line manager's responsibility. So employees can play their role in this, and what you want to create is an environment where employees feel empowered. They realise that the person who should care most about their own performance is themselves. Yes, of course, the line manager should care, but the employee should care even more. So the line manager doesn't have to do it all. They can ask the employee what they to suggest how they have been doing over this previous period, to do some sort of self-reflection and self-appraisal to go into that conversation with, and maybe even send it in advance so the manager's got that. They can themselves, they should be empowered to go and request feedback from their colleagues, their peers, their people in other departments, etc. So it's not all down to the manager, especially if they've got these big, a big team. No wonder they feel a bit, kind of overburdened. Share the load. Employees want to feel that this is their performance, and they should hopefully feel responsible for it.
Absolutely. It should feel like a valuable process to them that they want to participate in. And just, we'll move on to the sort of confidence, manager confidence, but also it is fair to say that in some organizations we've seen come to us with actually these very long review forms, and it really can take a long time to fill in. And often when you use the reporting tools and you see what responses people have added to the different questions, you find a lot of people saying, see above. And as noted earlier, and that's a good sign that the template is simply too long. and you're trying to do too much. So there are technical solutions to this as well, in terms of kind of the design of the prompts and the process, and really being very conscious about not trying to do too much out of one process. Okay, next question then. Well, or the next objection, which we kind of alluded to, is this thing of, I don't feel comfortable doing a performance review. I'm worried I'm going to say something stupid, or I'm going to give the wrong impression, or let's take the case where I've got a really good relationship, a working relationship with this individual, where it's all smiles and kind of happiness, and I care about them, and I know about their personal life and all that kind of stuff. How do I change that into a conversation where I'm saying, maybe something that they, might be a bit awkward, we haven't really talked about before. How do you counter that, Amira?
So something I find actually quite interesting about the poll, that whereas 58% said the reason was because their managers thought they didn't have time, only 12% don't feel comfortable doing a performance review, which I think is good news. And it's actually not in line with, apparently, the research, because 50% of managers, according to Mercer, don't feel comfortable conducting performance reviews effectively. So hopefully our audience is nice in advance. It's fantastic. In my experience, I know Mark has mentioned accidental managers. I think the point is that there are a lot of managers who have kind of ended up with responsibility for people management, either because that's the only way you get on through the hierarchy of the organization, or because someone has to do it. And for a lot of people, it does genuinely feel uncomfortable. Let's be honest about it. A lot of people find it the most disconcerting, the most kind of discombobulating part of their role, and they'd rather just get on with the other stuff. But I think the point is that they don't really have an option, because other research, so Deloitte have found that employees, everybody knows that employees are crying out for this. There's lots of research that says employees find having a good performance discussion and performance review, and their manager understanding their strengths, their development areas, their career plans, all that sort of stuff is absolutely critical. And in fact, it's useful. It's bottom line useful, because Deloitte have found that effective performance management in organizations means they're 1.5 times more likely to be profitable, to be highly profitable. So it has a bottom line impact. So you can't afford not to get it right. I guess my tips would be understanding how many different managers are uncomfortable in different categories. So there are lots of types of sort of uncomfortable people managers. Some of them are accidental line managers who probably just need a lot of help and a lot of guidance from some quite basic materials, the kind of stuff that appraisers got online, like prompts for a good check-in conversation covering different types of conversations, or how to run a good performance review. There are some really simple guides out there available. You do also get, sadly, some people who are kind of know-it-all, think that they know best, and that these people don't really need any guidance, in which case that might be a different kind of conversation, because that is their role and they need to do it. I think my final thing I'd say is 3 points would make a positive difference to everybody. Make it easy, make it continuous, make it clear. So make it easy by giving them guidance, make it continuous such that performance management is little and often, like the kind of short focus conversations that Tom talked about, and make it clear whose responsibility this is, because it is the responsibility of the line manager, but they can share it a bit with the employee. So make it clear who needs to do what in this process.
Excellent. Thank you. Tom, any thoughts on that?
I think picking up on that, I think with some people, you need to delve into why they're not feeling comfortable. Is it because they're not trained? Is it because they've got to have a difficult conversation? So back to Amira's point about categorizing people, you might have a category of people who actually they need to have a difficult conversation because performance hasn't been what you want it to be. I think this is always the rub with performance management. People view it as a tool to kind of beat people over the head with, rather than a supportive mechanism to actually get performance to where we want it to be. And that's both on the manager and on the employee side. So Roddy, where you're saying, in your example, I know this person really well, I've got to have an awkward conversation. I think you need to acknowledge that with the individual to go, this might feel awkward because I've got some feedback for you that might be out of the norm of our usual conversation. Now, hopefully that feedback isn't from something that happened 12 months ago, because if it is, as the employee, I'd be really annoyed with you going, well, why didn't you tell me then? Ultimately, as individuals, we want to know that we're doing the right thing, and we want to know that we're doing a good job for our organizations. So if we've done something, let's not worry about why we might have done something. If something's happened that isn't kind of in line with acceptable performance or the way that we want things to be done, most people would rather be told so they can correct that rather than just letting it fester. And it's the festering bit that then really tends to irritate people, because you'll end up having a conversation with your employee who goes, why didn't you tell me when this happened? I don't even remember the situation you're talking about. But it's because you've stalled on it and delayed on it because you feel too uncomfortable. So yes.
Can I just give a little anecdote of that, because it was excruciating early on in my career, which is long. I admit, nearly 30 years ago. I remember coming out of a meeting. I was actually at British Airways at the time, and my manager saying, "You didn't really handle that very well, Amira. I think you lost the audience," kind of thing. And I was like, "Oh God!" And I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. What can we talk about it?" And he went, "No, we can't do that until we have the appraisal." And I was like, "What? That's 8 months away." I was like, "You're joking." But it was, that was a long time ago. It wouldn't happen now. But I'll never forget it. It was like,
I think in some places people still have that mentality, particularly in organisations where the appraisal is once a year. Ultimately, even if that, hopefully everybody on the call would be very supportive of managers saying, yes, of course I'm going to pick up on performance straight away, rather than going, no, you must leave it until the annual performance cycle. I think there are different things that come to play here. Yes, there is an annual cycle in most organisations, but I think what we're also trying to talk about and get managers into is more frequent, quicker conversation. So then, to Amira's point, it becomes a continuous conversation. And ultimately, the bit that sometimes we tend to forget, or managers forget, while you can be friendly with your team at work, you are still their manager. So there does have to be this line that you kind of almost have to hold yourself against, because you might experience the fact that you are effectively responsible for hiring and firing your team. So if you can do that and be really good friends with people, great. If you can't, you need to establish particular and set boundaries that you're not prepared to go over, because you have that dynamic within your relationship. There is a power dynamic within the relationship, and you need to acknowledge it.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I would just add, I think the lack of comfort sometimes comes from potentially almost so where do you start with this? And potentially people, they may have set objectives earlier on in the year. They may have checked in against the progress towards them throughout the year, but quite often some of those things will sort of drift away, and maybe they haven't looked at them as frequently. Maybe they're not as relevant anymore. Maybe some of that feedback, it was only a small thing, so I'm not going to mention that. And that small thing then over the next sort of 3 or 4 months didn't correct itself, surprisingly, and it got bigger and it became more of an issue. And then suddenly you're faced with sort of having this conversation with all of this stuff. Well, I set the objectives, but we didn't really talk about them. And then I didn't really give them that feedback either. And it does make it a much harder conversation. I think it's in a similar sort of example to Amira's. I remember a manager coming to me once, they really happy with all the preparation that they'd done for the performance review. And they said, I've got all of this feedback. I've got examples and so on. I'm going back over the last sort of 4 or 5 months, but I'm not sure how they're going to react when I give them the feedback. And I sort of, part of me was, I was pleased that they were engaged in the process and that they'd, documented this sort of feedback. And but part of me sort of head in hands, like, why didn't they give that to them back in the moment? Why did they save it all for the performance review? But yeah, I think just sort of understanding why and where that discomfort's coming from.
Yes, and to anyone listening who hasn't seen it already, we have I did a great podcast episode with Emma King from Costello Medical around feedback, and they talk in their organization about this sort of moral obligation to give people feedback quickly, because, and if you've read the Radical Candor book, there's a great story there about how, the risks of not, or the kind of, the moral obligation of giving somebody some feedback that could help them improve, whereas otherwise they might find themselves out of a job in a year's time. And they say, well, why on earth didn't you tell me that you weren't happy with what I was doing? So there's a really good one there. And also I want to point out, in the questions, we've got some great comments actually. So Bryony, for example, asked a question which is around how do you deal with a situation where you're continuously bringing up minor issues but not seeing any improvements, but when you tackle things with a bit more strength, you get pushback. And I guess the answer lies in that continuous performance conversations that perhaps need to be documented, even if it's just a few sentences, making a note of things so that you can then go back and say, look, as you can see, we've been having this conversation quite a lot, frequently, and the decision hasn't been resolved, and so this is something that is serious. I guess that's one of the tools that you can use there.
I think to add to that, that's the backward way of looking at it, absolutely. But in those conversations, you need to point out what would happen in the future if changes aren't made. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you can then be saying, right, as your manager, what support do you need from me to make these changes? So you're offering yourself to the employee that you are there to help. It's then up to them to take that help or not. Because as Amira is saying, and I think we all agree as well, the employee is the person who's the most responsible for their own performance. Managers take it seriously, but you should take it even more seriously. And that's kind of the culture you want to drive. But you need to be guiding them through to go, this is now the second time we talk about the same issue. If it gets to a third, then this is what's going to happen. If you're then in that third side, if it gets to a fourth, this is what's going to happen. Do you know what? If it happens again, we're now going to be in kind of whatever your performance metrics then are and whatever your capability processes are, it starts to become more formal. But ideally, the idea of the manager is to get to the root issue of why the issue is there in the first place, and B, what is the reluctance to change. So your role as a manager becomes a little bit different rather than just going, you're not doing it again. It's like, but why? What's going on here? Let's help figure out and actually how we can unblock and change things.
Okay, fantastic. Now I'm going to move us on to the last few points. Okay, and I think a lot of them will be things that we've already discussed actually. So I'm going to start with the next one, which is, look, I only really need to do a review when it's with the person, when it's salary review time. That's what it's all about, right, Tom?
So I've picked up on this one because I've got an anecdote from my own career, and I won't talk about the organisation because otherwise people might figure it out. So I worked in an organisation where performance and reward were very strongly correlated, and the higher your performance, your reward went up kind of exponentially. So the stakes kind of get quite high. My performance review was one way. This organisation, your performance review was one way. It almost felt like a re-interview for your job every year without your manager really particularly saying very much in the time. You then get your reward letter and you think you've done a fantastic job. You think you know where you are. I mean, you're in HR, so you can see all the data of everybody else anyway. You start comparing yourself to where you are and you don't come out where you expect to be. So just delivering it at the time of reward. I mean, reward is a different conversation in itself. It's a connection to, it is the outcome of your performance. And you might have somebody who reacted like I did. I stormed off. I walked out of the building for about half an hour, then came back and basically picked up my laptop and went home for the day. I was that angry.
You said went home for good.
Not quite for good, but it did start the process of me mentally and psychologically coming out of that organisation. And the reason for that is because my expectations had not been managed at all. Now, not particularly actually that individual's fault, because they were a newish manager into the team. So, you know, we're actually very good friends now. But these are things that can happen. Performance and reward are two very different things. The whole point of the performance cycle and continuous conversations is to help your individuals know and understand where they are, not just to get to the end of the year and go, there's your bonus letter. Particularly, I mean, that's in an organisation where performance and reward are linked, completely linked. Some organisations, they're not. A bonus just might be about company targets, company profit. So that's no indication in any way, shape or form of how I've actually inputted into it. And also, that's one day. There are 364 other days of the year that I could be getting everything right or wrong without me knowing, if I'm not getting that guidance from my manager. So it's coupling too much together, and it's loading too much in one conversation that is generally a conversation where people just want to deliver a letter and off you go.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to move on to the next rebuttal. Mark, perhaps you could take this one, okay? Look, I've got, my team are great. They're doing just fine. I've got, you know, a range of people. I've taken on a couple of new people recently in my team, and they just seem great. Why can't they just carry on? Why do I need to sort of talk to them, have these meetings the whole time? I just want them to get on with their work.
I mean, I think I would say, how do you know if you're not talking to them? And it might not be a daily, weekly sort of conversation that you're having, and for some people it might be more frequent than others. You know, maybe those two new joiners you need to have slightly more regular conversations with to understand what their aspirations and motivations are, opportunity for you to set expectations, and then sort of check in and make sure that actually they have a really good onboarding experience into either the organization or your team. Whereas maybe you have got some more, you know, long-serving, well-established members of the team that you know really well. You've already got like a strong sense of psychological safety set up with them, and they will escalate or flag things to you if and when they want to talk to them. So maybe you don't need to talk to them as frequently, but you still need to have conversations with them occasionally, because people's aspirations change over time. Maybe not month to month, but certainly over time. So understanding, you know, are they still as satisfied with the work that they're doing? Are they enjoying it, or are they actually starting to think maybe a new challenge, or maybe taking some of that knowledge that they built up on Project X and applying it to something a bit different? So making sure that you do actually check in with them occasionally, I think is a very good idea.
And just picking up on that, I think, you know, a question I would ask is, so if the manager's response is my team managers are fine, so I don't need to check in with them often, how do you know? You know, how do you actually know if you haven't asked them? Which I guess is, you know, picking up on Mark's point. When did you last ask them, and how did you ask them? Did you ask them in a way that you would get an honest answer? And I you know, I remember the bad old days that maybe some people still use of the annual huge mammoth employee opinion survey, where that's the golden answer to whether people are satisfied or not. And it's like, you know, this huge lengthy questionnaire that most people, you know, generally it's people who are dead satisfied or dead unsatisfied who answer it, not necessarily the people in the middle. And it takes months, and you end up with results that are out of date, and everyone's exhausted, so they don't take action, and all the things that, you know, can go wrong. And I think it's interesting these days. So both LinkedIn and Amazon have a sort of, they have this setup where an employee, anyone in the organization, can only access their computer each day, every single day, if they answer one simple pulse question. And that pulse question is an anonymized and mandatory question that is something to do with how engaged are you, how well is your manager supporting you, do you feel like the culture, do you understand the culture or the strategy of the organization, something in I would imagine quite a big list of questions. And that's what helps them to understand whether people really are fine and are motivated. And I thought that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
quite like that.
Okay, one other point I would add is I think it's easy for managers to forget that more junior people, especially at the start of their career, they don't know what they're sort of entitled to do in terms of, requesting a check-in, for example. They don't, they wouldn't necessarily flag it to their manager that they want to talk. They might instead, think that they're sort of safer if they don't have any of those sort of conversations. They don't actually ask for them. But at the same time, they do need a lot of kind of reassurance and recognition. Everybody does. They want to know how they're doing, and that if they are doing fine, tell them. That's enormously reassuring, and someone could go off down a sort of an alley, in their own head. If you don't actually take the time. And it's one of those things where maybe to the manager, that conversation doesn't serve you any immediate value, but it's enormously value to to your team member.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We might come back to that one if we have time, but I'm going to ask now the final one. And interestingly, in the poll, only 10% of people said this is as a common objection, which is encouraging, unless maybe this is actually wrapped up in the I don't have time thing, as in it's I don't see the point of this. And I guess maybe this is a good one for you to sell the benefits of check-ins, discussions, performance conversations, giving recognition and feedback. If you had to sort of persuade a manager and sell it to them, what would you say? And Mark, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think I agree with your point, Rowley, and this is not necessarily managers not seeing the point, but not seeing the value in it, and potentially sort of a summation of some of the things we've spoken about today, but finding the relevant sort of hook or hooks as to, well, why is it a good idea in their specific context? Understanding the general benefits of it, I think is all well and good. But what does that mean for that sort of individual manager or group of managers? Are they trying to address a retention issue? And how can these conversations sort of serve to help them with that? Is there a motivation and engagement problem that they're looking to address? Is it a new team and looking to make sure that they set off in the right direction with a really clear set of objectives, and making sure that you're identifying any issues early and making those small course corrections along the way, rather than needing to make a big one further down the line. And then another point, which we haven't really talked too much about today, but around risk. And certainly if you're operating in a regulated environment, then making sure that your managers are having these conversations and they are being documented, and that you're able to demonstrate the link between performance and reward is really important. Because if the regulator comes sort of knocking, they're going to want to know, well, how do you manage performance? Show me the evidence behind it as well. And then protecting yourself from potential sort of lawsuits or grievances as well. And I'll finish on an example here from where I'd deployed appraised in a previous role. An employee was subsequently let go because of performance issues. They subsequently filed a lawsuit saying, well, no one had ever set me any objectives or given me any feedback or spoken to me about my performance. We had at least 2 documented check-ins or appraisals in the system that they had signed off on, that we were able to provide, and ultimately protected us against I guess what could have been a a costly lawsuit as well. So a few reasons, I think, as to helping people see the value and therefore the point in these kinds of conversations.
Thank you, Mark.
Can
Amira?
I just want to pick up on something we've not talked about the role of senior leaders. So the managers, because they set the agenda in an organization and the culture generally. And they need to also show people that they think there is a point and a value to performance management, because I've seen sadly many examples of where senior leaders seem to take themselves off the hook far too easily and think this is something that other people need to do, but I'm senior enough that my managers know what they're meant to be doing. That just doesn't work. It does not wash, because employees will notice what senior leaders are doing. And one of the other example, the other way around I've seen it, was a fantastic senior leader that I once had at Barclays, who used to start every town hall meeting with what feedback he had had over the last period that he had learnt from, and he actually called out whoever was the employee, however junior they were, who had given him the most insightful, often really quite challenging feedback about the strategy or about his behavior or about something that didn't land, and said, I'm really grateful to X person. And everyone would look round and look at this person because they had been called out of being brave and courageous for actually giving some quite hard-hitting feedback. And it was like, that's the kind of stuff that senior leaders can make a difference to. And then people know there's a point to it.
Thank you. And Tom?
I think a couple of things that come to my mind. One is, who are you as a leader, right? What do you want your teams to be saying about you? Are you the sort of leader who's just going to be managing your team kind of remotely, hands off? Personally, the way I coach leaders is actually to be the manager, that what your job there is actually to try and promote your whole team as quickly as you possibly can to try and fill your shoes, and off you go. So actually that changes the context and the tone. Absolutely, you already have the organizational culture, but I'm sure we've all been in cultures where, to Amira's point, the more senior leaders aren't doing it. But you as an individual, as a manager, you've got to make your own stand. You've got to be your own manager and manage the way you want to. Just because it's not happening above you, that doesn't give you the excuse to not do it. It is an excuse, and it's an excuse that a lot of people use. But I always personally think it's a bit of a weak excuse. So, well, you're not happy that you're not having a performance review. Don't flow that down through the organisation. Whereas, some people are quite happy that as a manager, I'm not having a performance review with my manager. So that's kind of, more ostrich head in sand, don't really want to do any of this at all. I think ultimately an organisation can express why performance management is important. And there is always the organizational context. It comes down to the manager connecting with it and the manager connecting with their employees. So if the manager isn't doing anything about it, I think HR's role is not necessarily to go to the managers, to go to the level above, to go, what are you doing to support your managers in managing their teams? Because let's be clear, HR are not the performance management police of an organization. We're there to help guide, coach, and course correct. So if we go the level above, we start talking with them about, actually, are you talking about performance? Are you talking about how you want performance to happen within your part of the organization? What feedback are you getting about how performance is being managed within the organization? So HR's role really is to help shape, but not to kind of walk into a manager and go, why aren't you talking to Tom about his performance? It's to help kind of guide at a more senior level, because HR are not the managers. We're there to support the managers, and managers need to manage.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now we've got to 11:45, and which is what the time we've got booked. And so what I'm going to do, I think if you're happy, we're going to stay on the line, and I'm going to go through some more of the questions that we've got and comments that we've got coming in, and there's some really fantastic ones. But what I'm going to do for the people who need to leave now, I'm just going to point out that all three of these wonderful people are on this call are consultants available to help you out and to kind of talk further with you, and that we're going to circulate their details to everybody on the call. And I'm sure they would love to have kind of even more kind of difficult, tricky questions thrown at them. So give them a try and see what they say. I'm sure you can connect over LinkedIn, and also, yeah, we'll pass over email addresses and contact details. So thanks to everybody who's joined so far and has to go, but we're going to stay on just for a few minutes, if that's all right, and we'll just go through a few more comments. So if I scroll down here, I can see training managers, obviously. Giving managers templates and prompts and guides is a huge kind of help. Kind of, we often at Praise talk about putting in guardrails to help that people kind of hold on to guide them through these conversations, so they feel there's a good structure, so it's not going to go kind of off track and into areas where they don't feel comfortable. That often helps, but also obviously kind of one-to-one or coaching or training is also extremely helpful as well. And this, obviously, it takes time for people to develop these skills, time and experience. We've got Joanne here saying that feedback should not be a surprise, as the end of the year should be obviously discussed all the way through, as we talked about. And a lot of people saying, yes, they agree with the comment about the radical candor and the giving continuous feedback. We've got a couple of questions, actually, about managers being nervous about discussing pay rises or knowing how to deal with reward conversation. Now, we did talk about potentially trying to separate out a reward conversation from a how are you doing performance development. This is where we'd like you to get to. This is your kind of bright future we imagine for you sort of conversation. Any of you had to deal with reward conversations that have been difficult, where somebody, for example, has been pushing for a big raise, but where you weren't able or you didn't think it was justified?
Yeah, I've done quite a few, having kind of led reward functions as well in different businesses. Yep. This comes up quite at least once a year. I think the first thing about it is it goes back to the point of, have you managed that person's expectations throughout the year? If you have, and they're still coming going, I deserve this because my job has got bigger, well, you kind of go, well, has it? Has it really? If it's true, then obviously that we're kind of taking the path here in this part of the conversation, going, actually, the organisation doesn't quite agree with the employee. I think there is a conversation around A, performance, B, reward, that are different. First of all, one is, if the employee's going, my job has got so much bigger, well, that takes the conversation down about the size and the scope of the role, the impact of the role, and a lot of organisations, you'll have a formal mechanism to reevaluate that role. Has it got bigger? Has it got more senior? Is it then going into a different pay band? If you've just got someone who thinks they are amazing, I'm sure we've all had these, their performance doesn't support the fact that they are amazing, but they've never been told, and now they're pushing for a pay rise. Well, ultimately, you're getting to a point where if you've tried to keep them on track during the year and they're still being a little bit delusional about it, you kind of have to ask yourself the question, how do I bring this person back down to earth? And I would flip it around. The conversations I've always had is put it back to the employee to go, okay, well, how have you demonstrated X, Y, and Z? Because it's the X, Y, and Z that we would then consider ready for a pay rise, for example. So be a bit, having your own mind what the clarity is around what constitutes a pay rise and what doesn't, and get them to talk about it. But be really specific about it. And if you're hearing other things, go, that's all great. That is everything that you've done, and that's brilliant. But how does that connect to these 3, 4, 5 criteria that we have? That means, we have to go through that conversation. And if they can't draw, if they're drawing a blank, then you're kind of at the end of the conversation go, well, you as the employee, you've not actually demonstrated really that you're ready for a pay rise. Then if they're coming out with stuff that actually does sit within what you would consider to be pay rise worthy, then again, the conversation goes on a different route. But if this is about a manager doesn't think they're ready for a pay rise, well, there's a reason there. So again, you go back to kind of the radical candor theory of being honest with someone, not being rude, but being honest, saying, I'm really sorry, you are not ready for a pay rise, and this is the reason why. And I know that sounds really simple to do, sitting here and it's hard, and you probably will need support because those conversations are hard. But just because something's hard doesn't mean we should be shying away from it or ignoring it. Just make sure that when you know you're going to have that conversation, you've got the right support structure around you to deliver that conversation.
And just to add to that, I think I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, if you predict it's going to be a difficult conversation, rehearse it. Rehearse it with your dog, with your neighbour, with your friend, someone who is not in the organisation, and get them to give you the stuff that you think you're going to get, so that you can rehearse how you're going to hold the line. Because as Tom said, holding the line can feel difficult, but it's absolutely essential. That is your role as a manager. You're not their mate. You are, in the end, there is a bit of power, dynamic here. I think it might be Mark who said it, actually. So make sure that you have got the answers, even if it's a bit parrot-like, to say, to keep on holding that line. That's the first thing I'd say. Do some rehearsal. And the second is, I forgot what it is. I can't remember.
I think what do you think of it? What do you think of it, Mira? I would just add, I think this is why it's really important to separate out some of these conversations, because if you're hoping to have a really constructive development, aspirational focused conversation with someone, whilst they're coming into that conversation thinking, well, I need to justify why I'm a top performer and therefore worthy of a pay rise, don't expect them to be honest about their, development areas or what they need some more coaching on or whatever, because they're going to come in and try and justify why they're so brilliant. So separating out those conversations and doing them at different times of the year, I think is pretty important.
Yep, great. Okay, a couple more questions we've got here. Actually, a comment from Christine. Thanks for submitting this. So she's found that having a behaviours framework really helps performance conversations. So where you set out sort of behaviour that that you expect from people. And I often think about organizations' values are sometimes underutilized. They're sort of sometimes just stuck up on the wall, and sort of you hope that people do them or live them or whatever it is. But actually, the thing about values is they talk about how people should behave and work together with each other for long-term success. So we can all often have kind of short-term success if we operate in a way that suits us best. That might be not, just kind of plowing on with something and not necessarily getting agreement with everybody else, or not involving or thinking about other people or whatever it is. But actually that is short-term success. And the longer-term success normally revolves around people working together to work in a way that's kind of in accordance with the values. So being able to kind of really articulate that in a discussion is really important. Sometimes we see review templates and things like that just say, how have you sort of done these values? But actually, and managers often struggle with that, and they're asked to put a rating on them, and it's really, really hard. So actually taking a bit more time to really articulate what the values, what are they for, can really help guide people through those conversations.
I agree. Sorry, you go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I think there's a balance here between keeping it simple and then providing all of that kind of structure and guidance as well. And you can ask people, well, what did you achieve? And look at like the sort of outputs and ask them, how did you achieve it? And look at the behaviors and the values and so on that underpin all of that, and potentially, a rating for each. But keeping it simple, is key. But again, giving them enough in terms of guidance and guardrails so that when you say, how did you achieve it, they understand what that means.
And all I was going to say was just that how, the more practical and real and authentic it is for an organization, the better. So, it's not just some big word about collaboration. It's like, what does collaboration actually mean in this organization, in this context, in this school, in this hospital, in this corporate environment, whatever it might be, because it varies. And I think, line managers can sometimes struggle with this big conceptual thing. And I just trying to maybe get some employees together in a room with an HR person and to say, what do we mean? What do these values mean around here? And then publishing that, so that it's not just HR's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility to actually articulate what it means in that context.
Getting some of your leaders to talk about like the values or the behaviors as well and what they mean to them, bring them to life for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so. For me, performance is the how and the what. They are the two core fundamentals that go into it.
Yep.
You can't deliver everything, but then annoy everybody while you are delivering everything. Yes, we can always talk about what the organization over here should be doing. I completely agree. What does collaboration mean? Great. But as a manager, you also just have to have this conversation directly with your team, because this is about a team way of working. So how do we want to value each other? What is and what is not acceptable? There's a problem that you can get into with this is what it means as an organization. People then think that that is the exhaustive list. So my example doesn't fit here, therefore I can't use that as an example, because sometimes, to Mark's point, it gets a bit cumbersome, it feels a bit more complicated, and people then can't actually do the critical thinking themselves. So my view always is, with that backdrop within the organization, that's what creates the culture. How are you bringing this to life as a team? What does collaboration mean to you? And as a team, agree, and then you hold each other to account on it.
Okay, right. I don't think we've got time for any more questions apart from maybe one signing off comment. So we've got, and I think what we'll do is we'll try and address these other questions in a blog post or something like that. But I think maybe one kind of final comment from each of you could address this question that we've had in from Emma, which is, how do you start to change the approach, the old approach that's currently embedded within an organization? You're a sole HR director, perhaps, and you've seen the other side, you've had a glimpse of nirvana, and you want to make this happen within the organization. How do you get managers to start doing little and often conversations, taking this more seriously, feeling more maybe more relaxed about it and less kind of uptight about having this massive preparation and that it's going to take ages? What's the kind of first thing you would say to this person to go and do?
My first thing would be walk the talk. Do it yourself. Make it clear that you are doing it. I'm quite critical. I'm in HR, so I'm really critical of our own function. HRDs are usually really useless at doing this. So the HRD is not doing it at that level within the organization, and it kind of goes down and across. So the HRD level, they should be walking the talk. So that means doing it with your team. So you're building the expectation of this is what's going to happen. And you're having this conversation with your peers. How are you doing it? What are you doing? How are you getting on with these conversations? The HRD's job is to set the organizational context. So do it, don't just talk about it.
Thank you. Amira? Or Mark, sorry.
No. I was going to say, I'll go with three things. I'll go with early involvement. So if you're thinking about changing your approach or rolling out a new system, get your managers involved in defining the problem, identifying the solution. They will become your sort of champions and stakeholders, and they'll feel like they're on the hook for the success of it all as well. Actively manage the change, so making sure you're building that awareness, knowledge, desire, and so on throughout the organization. And then as HR, let people see and feel the benefits of actually doing this, especially if you're asking them to enter information into a system. And Appraised is great at this, but show them the outputs of that. Like, let them know what you're doing with that information, connecting the dots. If you're taking development information out of there and using it to inform your L&D approach, let people know. We used to use you said, we did as part of our sort of comms around it. So yeah, early involvement, manage the change, and let them see and feel the benefits.
Thank you. And Amira?
And I'm very conscious of time because it's gone 12, and I'm amazed how many people are still on, which is very nice. But I would say probably single thing, give them a one-pager. Give people just a little bit of guidance about how to do it, and maybe send them the link to some of our guides that say, these are some prompts for a good check-in conversation, so that they know it's not that scary. It's actually, and sorry, last thing, know that it's a learning process for everybody. And you might not get it right at the beginning, and there might be some uncomfortable conversations, but you will get better over time, and it will make a difference to yours and everyone else's performance.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. And you're right about the templates. In fact, we've got, if anyone needs sort of help designing a set of prompts or templates or anything like that, we've got loads on our website. Do take a look. Personally, I think I absolutely agree. Walk the walk, talk the talk first. If you're feeling a little bit isolated, go and find a champion, a senior leader who's on your side, and do it with them, push it through. Okay, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much to everybody who joined. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. There are loads more, some fantastic comments, and thank you so much to Mark, Tom, and Amira, who've you've really tackled this with great kind of aplomb. And as an accidental manager now, I'm feeling much more confident. Thank you very much. And we'll go off and go and have some of those conversations right now. So thanks very much. And looking forward to seeing some of our guests on the next webinar or podcast that we do soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.